Life seems to always bring us new situations. Sometimes we know exactly how to handle things, but other times we might be at a loss to know exactly what to do. It's not always easy to determine what we should do in difficult matters and to know how to balance different factors. Would this action be appropriate in this time and place? Is that what we would do lawful? Is it moral? What's the best thing for me to do? Oftentimes we need to go through a process of deliberation and examine things carefully before we can come to a proper conclusion. And we see the apostles faced with exactly this, their very first major decision that they need to make after Jesus has now ascended into heaven. Questions had come up with how much of a connection is there between the Christian faith and with being Jewish. Paul and Barnabas, as we've heard the last couple weekends, they had gone and began to spread the good news of Jesus among the non-Jewish communities in Asia Minor. But since Christianity in many ways is a fulfillment of Judaism, there were questions as to what kind of Jewish practices should Christians still maintain. Did Gentile Christians have to, for example, be circumcised? Did they have to follow all the dietary laws and all of the Jewish rituals in order to be Christian? What about marriage and the commandments? And so in response to all these new questions, the apostles, here in this first reading, gather together for the church's very first council in Jerusalem. And we can apply this to ourselves as well. We also have some major decisions that will be facing our parishes as we continue along the pastoral planning journey of faith. Similar to how the apostles met, we also have begun a number of different meetings. First, the archdiocese met with the priests in a clergy conference several months ago. Then we had a group of leaders from our future grouping of 8 parishes all gather together and meet with the archbishop and archdiocesan leaders up at St. Teresa's in Clearwater. And then from this larger group of leaders from our 8 parishes, then a smaller group, a family pastoral planning team has been formed that will continue to meet over the course of the next months. And just as it was impractical to expect the entire church to gather there in Jerusalem to make this decision, so too that's the same thing for our planning meetings. We can't have every single person there at these meetings. But just as the apostles, once they were done in their deliberations, they sent out by letter to inform everyone of what the conclusion was, so too we're trying to communicate the various aspects of this process. So it can be through talking with us priests or leaders from your parishes, finding information in the bulletin, going to the journeyoffaith.org website from the Archdiocese. We also have a web page on our website as well that goes through a number of different aspects of the planning. I created a bunch of short videos to try to break up the different pieces of the planning and explain the various parts of it as well. At the Council of Jerusalem, we find that there was a lot of debate that went on when they gathered. Paul and Barnabas, they gave testimony as to their experience of God working through them. And so they were trying to gather as much information as possible so that their decisions could be based upon the real data. Peter and James then, leaders of the apostles, they're going to make important speeches. And finally, they get to the decision and send a letter that would be circulated among the various communities, explaining what their conclusion finally would be. And they concluded that there were certain practices that needed to be followed by everyone. For example, the commandments, to engage in proper marriage, to avoid pagan sacrifices. But there were other practices, like circumcision and the dietary laws, that non-Jewish Christians would not need to take upon themselves. They wouldn't need to be burdened with them. And so as our family pastoral planning team meets over the next several months, they too will be striving to make data-based discussions and to debate and talk about and ponder what exactly to do. And a lot of those specific details will be in the meetings and won't be made public, just as some of those debates within the Council of Jerusalem weren't really made public either. We don't even find them written about in the Scriptures. But then, once meetings are done, then we want to make sure that we tell you what we've been doing and what kind of discussions have been going on and all the data that we're using. Much of that's already available to you if you go and check out on the websites. The meetings will culminate, just like the Council of Jerusalem did, with a decision. So it will culminate by producing a planning proposal that will then be submitted to the Archbishop in November. And then he will look it over and then approve the final plan that will begin to be implemented after that. Now, when we have these kinds of decisions like that of the Council of Jerusalem, or this is the pastoral planning for our family of parishes, as well as other individual decisions that you have to make within the lives of your own families, these shouldn't simply be made based upon just our own personal opinions. There needs to be a much more solid foundation for deciding what is good and what is true. And so the apostles in that first reading explain how they come to the conclusion that they send out. They say, it is the decision of the Holy Spirit and of us. So you see, their decision wasn't just their personal opinion, but it was founded upon God's will, given to them through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And so we see also in the gospel tonight that Jesus is preparing the apostles and us for a future where we have to make difficult decisions at times. Jesus tells us, the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I told you. So you see, Jesus himself is the one who promised to give the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity, to us. He calls the Holy Spirit the advocate. The Greek word there is actually the paraclete. So that term advocate or paraclete has a richness of meaning to it. It includes ideas such as being a comforter, a helper, a counselor. And so as helper and counselor, the Holy Spirit, Jesus says, will help to teach us everything. When we come across new situations that we don't know what to do, the Holy Spirit is here to guide us. And Jesus says that the Holy Spirit will remind us of all that he told us. So you see, even though we face new, unique situations throughout our life, throughout the course of the life of the church, the Holy Spirit guides us by putting us in contact with the eternal truths of God, the truths that never change. And one of these gifts, the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, is specifically for this purpose of applying God's eternal truths to our practical situations. And that's the gift of counsel. As Jesus points out in the gospel, trying to follow him can bring moments when we may be troubled and afraid, where we're unsure, where we're timid, and life can get so complicated at times. And so the gift of counsel from the Holy Spirit is meant to guide us along the winding and often troublesome paths of life, so that we can reach our final goal of God himself. So the gift of counsel applies God's own reasoning to the specific cases, specific decisions that we have to make. And so if you find yourself having trouble making a difficult decision, or if you're not sure what to do, bring that situation to prayer. Ask the Holy Spirit for the gift of counsel. The Holy Spirit will come to our aid and help us to know what to do and the right time to do it. He can help to make our decisions more sure and bold. So pray, too, over the next number of months that the members of our family pastoral planning team will also be guided by the Holy Spirit's gift of counsel. After the coming of the Holy Spirit, the apostles, all the saints, they're able to act with greater security and rapidity. They don't follow the counsels and the opinions of mere men or even their own reason. They have a higher norm. They follow eternal reason, the mind of God, that illuminates their spirit and lays before them the road that God desires them to follow. Finally, in the gospel, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you." Peaceful and happy are the souls who yield to the Holy Spirit's guidance.